They announced it suddenly, a 90-day U.S. visa freeze targeting citizens of Burkina Faso, the number being thrown. Around 12,000 people blocked. Among them, 5,300 students whose plans to study abroad had been thrown into limbo. Imagine waking up one morning, passport in hand, ready to board flights, reach classrooms, pursue dreams only to find the doors slammed shut. That's the moment thousands of Burkinabés found themselves in. And President Ibrahim Traoré did not stay quiet. He met it head-on. Across Ouagadougou, in cafes, dormitories, and homes, students whispered anxiously, "What now? Will I lose my scholarship? Will I be stuck here?" Parents paced, hoping for news. The courts of international diplomacy watched closely. But for those 12,000, it wasn't abstract. It was life paused. Traoré refused to accept the freeze as mere policy. To him, it was personal, national, symbolic. He pushed back with a boldness that startled many. This was not a passive state under siege, but a government ready to argue, to resist, to fight. He challenged the logic behind punishing people in the name of politics. That freeze was meant to be a show of power. Often, visa bans or travel restrictions are wielded as blunt instruments, a way to pressure governments, to provoke compliance, to punish. But Burkina Faso's response, spearheaded by Traoré, turned the script. He refused to cower. He refused to plead. He refused to beg for exemptions. Instead, his government demanded transparency. They asked, on what grounds are these visas suspended? Which students are included? What criteria? Traoré issued public statements, rallied diplomatic channels, and drew international attention. What was supposed to be a unilateral bit of coercion became a matter of global scrutiny. For those students stranded, many already halfway through their journeys, the freeze is more than an administrative delay. It's lost opportunities, homesickness, frustration, uncertainty. Years of study plans, resources invested, dreams built on gaining new knowledge, all halted. Some risk losing scholarships. Others may never recover the momentum they'd built. And yet in the tension, there's something stirring. The freeze, meant to intimidate, has united voices. Burkinabés abroad, students in diaspora, civil society, and media began to speak louder. Across platforms, they posted testimonies, shared stories, demanded accountability. The freeze gave them a rallying point. It turned scattered fear into collective resistance. Traoré's posture, unapologetic, assertive, has become a symbol of national dignity under pressure. Without turning it into rhetoric, he framed it plainly. If your policy suspends nations' rights to mobility, you must answer to the people. He forced the debate. Are visas privileges to be revoked at whim, or rights protected by norms and fairness? International media began to pick up the story. Analysts dissected the policy's implications. Some called it overreach. Others called it retaliation. But many underlined the deeper shift. A small, landlocked country pushing back against a global giant and demanding explanation. In Washington, diplomats scrambled behind closed doors. Questions once dismissed now demanded answers. Was this legal under us and international law? What precedent would it set? What blowback would it provoke in academic exchanges, cultural ties, and perceptions of American soft power? Back in Burkina Faso, in classrooms and living rooms, people followed each update with bated breath. Would the freeze be lifted? Would exceptions be made? Would international pressure help? Could this moment be turned from crisis into leverage? Some critics warned of escalation, that pushing back too hard could deepen isolation, trigger retaliation elsewhere. But many saw something different, that this confrontation, though painful, is the kind of pressure that reveals the limits of power when dignity refuses to bend. Yes, the scale is large, 12,000 people stuck, 5,300 students in limbo, but the heart of this is human. It is about promise deferred, lives in transit, hopes clashing with geopolitics. And it is about a leader, choosing not to let his people be collateral in political maneuvers. Traoré's response may not immediately unfreeze every case, It may not restore every flight, but his decision to fight, to demand answers, to center the voices of students and citizens, that response already counts for something. This is more than a policy clash. It's a test of whose humanity counts in global systems. It's a question. Can nations on the margins stand firm when the giants impose silence? And for now, Burkina Faso has said, "We will speak." When the news broke about the US visa freeze on Burkina Faso, it didn't land like some abstract policy note tucked away in diplomatic cables. It hit real lives, suddenly and sharply. 12,000 people, including more than 5,000 students, found their futures locked in a holding pattern. Behind the headlines, you can almost hear the silence that falls when a young student checks their email, sees application suspended, and realizes months of planning and dreaming have been paused by a political decision made far away. That silence carries weight. It's the sound of lost time, of uncertainty, of power flexed not on battlefields but on paperwork. Visa freezes are often framed in sterile terms, a tool of foreign policy, a temporary suspension, a necessary measure. But underneath those phrases, the reality is harsher. They're leverage. They're used to bend governments by squeezing the mobility of their citizens, hitting hardest not at officials but at students, workers, families, and those who dare to imagine a life beyond their borders. It's like pulling a lever on the machinery of human movement, suddenly turning freedom of travel into a bargaining chip. For Washington, the move might seem strategic, another card to play in the high-stakes game of geopolitics. But for Burkina Faso, the ripples feel like shockwaves. Students preparing for semesters abroad scramble to find answers. Families who've saved and sacrificed to send their children to study overseas see years of planning jeopardized. Professionals with job offers abroad are left hanging in uncertainty. This isn't some abstract chessboard. It's a crowded airport terminal where people are suddenly told the flight isn't boarding, with no idea when the gate will open again. The cruelty of using visas as political leverage is that the burden doesn't fall on the leaders being pressured. Presidents, ministers, generals, they aren't the ones whose study visas are revoked. They aren't the ones sitting in limbo, watching deadlines for tuition payments and enrollment slip away. It's the young, the hopeful, the ordinary people who bear the brunt. It's a policy that hurts not the decision makers but the dreamers. And then there's the timing. Every day of a 90-day freeze is another day a student loses access to classes, another day an intern misses work, another day someone can't join their family. The clock doesn't pause just because visas are frozen. Universities start without you. Employers move on. Life keeps unfolding, and the freeze leaves people stranded on the wrong side of opportunity. Imagine being accepted into a program you've worked for years to qualify for, only to have that chance evaporate, not because you failed, but because politics decided you didn't get to try. For Burkina Faso, this freeze also sends a deeper message. It reminds people that mobility something many in the West take for granted is never guaranteed for Africans. A passport that doesn't open doors but instead raises eyebrows, prompts questions, faces suspicion. The freeze amplifies that imbalance, turning the ability to move freely into something that can be switched on and off depending on the whims of global politics. It's a reminder that in the hierarchy of global power, some people's futures are negotiable. But here's the twist. Leverage only works if the target accepts the pressure. President Ibrahim Traoré didn't sit back quietly. He clapped back, loud and clear, framing the freeze not as a policy tool, but as an injustice. That defiance flipped the narrative. Suddenly, the freeze wasn't just a show of American strength. It was evidence of how far the US was willing to go to force compliance. By speaking out, Traoré turned a quiet coercion into a loud confrontation. That act of resistance matters. It gives voice to the students left in limbo, to the families holding their breath, to the ordinary citizens whose lives have been caught in the crossfire. It reframes the freeze as not just bureaucracy but as a weapon, and it forces the world to see the human faces behind the numbers. For many Burkinab, freezes become a rallying point. It's no longer just about visas, it's about dignity. about refusing to let mobility be used as a leash, about demanding that their children, their students, their workers are not pawns in someone else's game. This is where political leverage backfires, and people see the tactic for what it is and unite against it. In living rooms across Burkina Faso, people talk about the freeze not just with frustration, but with pride in how their president is standing up to it. The sense of being treated unfairly, of being sidelined, is familiar, but now it's being voiced loudly on the global stage. That changes how people see themselves. It sparks conversations about sovereignty, fairness, and what kind of future the country wants to build. The human stories will linger longest. The student who missed their semester but refuses to give up. The professional who lost an internship but is determined to try again. The family that turned disappointment into motivation to push for local opportunities. These stories become the quiet defiance that mirrors their leaders' stance. They show that political leverage, while powerful, doesn't always work as intended. Sometimes it unites instead of divides. Sometimes it inspires resilience instead of submission. Visa freezes might seem like paperwork and policy, but they reach deep into people's lives, reshaping futures with the stroke of a pen. They expose the gap between those who make decisions and those who live with their consequences. And they remind us that behind every statistic, 12,000 visas frozen, 5,300 students blocked, there are individual stories of hope put on hold. Each one a reminder of the human cost of political leverage. When the US announced its visa freeze on Burkina Faso, many expected the response to be subdued, maybe even apologetic. After all, this wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a bold move, one that disrupted thousands of lives and carried the weight of international disapproval. But Ibrahim Traoré didn't take the path of silence. He stood tall, unshaken, and gave a response that wasn't just political, it was deeply human, filled with the kind of defiance that resonates far beyond the borders of his country for the people of Burkina Faso. The freeze wasn't only about travel restrictions. It felt like an attack on dignity. Imagine being told your people, your students, your professionals are no longer welcome, not because of anything they personally did, but because of the political standoff between leaders. That sting runs deeper than paperwork. It touches pride. It touches respect. It touches identity. Traoré's refusal to bow to that message mattered because it told every Burkinabe, you are not less. You're not to be humiliated. And your worth isn't defined by foreign approvals stamped into your passport. This wasn't just defiance for the sake of political theater. It was rooted in something more personal and more profound. The dignity of a nation that has endured enough of being treated as expendable in global politics. Traoré's words carried a firmness that made ordinary people feel seen. When he spoke against the freeze, it wasn't with technical jargon or diplomatic hedging, it was with clarity. The simple truth that dignity cannot be negotiated away. That directness gave people strength. It transformed frustration into a collective pride. The sense that they had a leader willing to take the blows, rather than let his people carry them silently, in the cafes of Ouagadougou, in classrooms, in the hum of daily markets. People repeated his words with admiration. At least he is not afraid to speak, they'd say. That matters more than outsiders might understand. In a world where African voices are often pushed aside or drowned out by louder powers, having a leader speak boldly against a giant like the United States sends a shock of empowerment. It says, we may be smaller, but we will not be disrespected. The power of dignity is often underestimated. Policies, sanctions, tariffs, visa freezes, these are seen as instruments of control, of discipline. But dignity is stubborn. It refuses to break easily. When leaders protect it, when they choose pride over submission, they unlock something powerful in their people, a belief that they are worthy of standing tall, even in the face of giants. Traoré's defiance was not reckless bravado. It was an act of reclaiming space for his nation in a conversation where it was meant to remain silent. And while Washington may have intended the freeze as leverage, the unintended consequence was to strengthen Traoré's bond with his people. For students left stranded, his defiance gave them a voice. For families left in despair, his stance gave them hope. For professionals stuck in limbo, His words became a shield reminding them they are not forgotten. He shifted the narrative from one of helplessness to one of resistance. That shift changes everything, because dignity is not abstract. It's in the faces of the young who, despite the freeze, walk into classrooms at home with determination. It's in the resilience of families who say, if they close one door, we will find another. It's in the quiet strength of a community that refuses to let its future be defined by another nation's stamp of approval. Traoré's defiance is not about ignoring the pain of those affected, it's about refusing to let that pain turn into humiliation. The symbolism of a leader speaking boldly when the easy path would have been silence cannot be overstated. In international politics, silence is often mistaken for compliance. Traoré disrupted that expectation. His voice echoed beyond Burkina Faso, sparking debates across Africa and beyond about sovereignty, respect, and the value of standing firm even when the cost is high. That ripple effect is perhaps the most powerful part of his defiance. It inspired others to imagine that dignity can be protected even when power is unequal. And for ordinary Burkinabe, that dignity feels tangible. It's something you carry when you walk into your workplace, when you stand in line at an embassy, when you explain to your children why their older siblings cannot leave just yet. Instead of saying, "We are powerless," you can say, "Our leader is fighting for us." That changes the weight of waiting. It transforms despair into endurance. Defiance and dignity are sometimes painted as luxuries in politics, as if survival requires submission, but Traoré's stand shows that they are essentials. A nation without dignity is one that can be pushed endlessly, manipulated without limit. By pushing back, even against a giant, Burkina Faso sent a clear message: our people are not pawns, and their futures are not bargaining chips. The visa freeze is still in effect, and lives remain disrupted. But Traoré's response ensures that those lives are not erased or ignored. His defiance became a mirror, reflecting back the injustice of the freeze. His insistence on dignity turned what could have been a quiet humiliation into a loud statement of resistance. And in that defiance, a nation bruised by politics found pride, strength, and the reassurance that dignity once defended cannot easily be stripped away. Behind the numbers, behind the diplomatic headlines, and behind the political posturing, there are people, real people, whose lives have been pushed into uncertainty because of the visa freeze. When the US decided to suspend visas for Burkinabe citizens, the immediate image that surfaced in media was about geopolitics and power plays. But the truest image, the one that lingers quietly and painfully, is the student sitting on the edge of their bed, staring at a packed suitcase that may not be opened for months. It's the mother who sold land to fund her child's education abroad, lying awake wondering if those sacrifices were for nothing. It's the father clutching documents, searching embassy websites for any sign of hope. This is the human cost, messy, emotional, and rarely acknowledged in the fine print of foreign policy. Take the example of a young woman, accepted into a master's program in the US after years of relentless study. She prepared everything visa approved, ticket bought, goodbyes said. But overnight, she's told her visa is suspended for 90 days. To someone sitting in Washington, that's just a temporary freeze, a policy decision that might eventually pass. To her, it's a semester lost, maybe even a scholarship gone. Universities won't always wait. Classes won't pause. Dreams don't always get second chances. That 90 days feels less like a pause and more like a door slammed shut. For the 5,300 students caught in limbo, this isn't just a bureaucratic snag, it's identity shaking. Studying abroad isn't just about a degree. For many, it's about representing their country, gaining knowledge they can bring back, making their families proud, and carrying the hopes of communities who see education as a pathway out of hardship. Having that snatched away feels cruel, like being told your dreams are disposable in the name of politics. And then there are the families. Parents who spent years scraping together. Money suddenly face the possibility that their child's future may stall before it even begins. Many sold property, took loans, or relied on extended family contributions. The freeze doesn't just crush ambition. It leaves financial scars. Imagine explaining to lenders or relatives that the investment may not pay off because of a political feud beyond your control. It's humiliating, heartbreaking, and heavy to bear. The freeze also ripples through communities. In Burkina Faso, when one student wins a scholarship abroad, it's rarely just for them. Villages and neighborhoods often pool together encouragement, small contributions, emotional support. That student becomes a beacon, someone who will one day bring back skills, knowledge, or at least the pride of representing their community. To see them stopped at the border of opportunity is to see a whole community's hope stumble. Children, too, feel the impact in ways often overlooked. Younger siblings who idolize their older brothers or sisters now watch as those dreams are deferred. They ask questions. Why can't she go? Why doesn't America want us? Those questions cut deep because they touch on dignity, self-worth, and belonging. They plant seeds of doubt in young minds about whether the world will ever treat them as equals. The cost isn't. It's just emotionalized practical. Some students already abroad but due for visa renewals are now stuck, unable to travel home for holidays or family emergencies. Others who return home briefly are stranded, unable to get back to their schools. Professors and programs that once welcomed them now have empty seats. The freeze fractures academic continuity, leaving gaps that may never be filled. What's often overlooked is how moments like this can fracture trust. Families who once encouraged their children to aim for international education may now hesitate. The risk feels too high. Why pour years of effort into something that can be erased with a stroke of a pen thousands of miles away? That hesitation has long-term effects, not just on individuals, but on the flow of knowledge, culture, and collaboration between nations. And yet, in the midst of all this pain, there's resilience. Students are networking, seeking alternative opportunities, looking at European, Asian, or African universities instead. Families are rallying around each other, telling their children that their worth isn't diminished by a denied visa. Leaders like Traoré are amplifying their struggle, ensuring their voices are not silenced. This resilience doesn't erase the hardship, but it transforms the freeze from a quiet suffering into a loud story of endurance. At its core, the human cost of this visa freeze is about dignity interrupted. It's about students told their potential doesn't matter, families told their sacrifices aren't recognized, and communities told their pride must wait. And yet, in every delay, in every setback, the humanity of those affected shines through. They still dream. They still plan. They still believe that their futures cannot be permanently caged by politics. The visa freeze may have been designed as leverage in a political game. But for students and families, it is a deeply personal wound. It reveals how easily lives can be disrupted when people are treated as pawns instead of humans. It highlights the imbalance of power between those who make decisions and those who live with their consequences. And most of all, it shows that the real cost of political maneuvers isn't measured in diplomatic gains or losses, but in broken plans, dashed hopes, the quiet tears of families waiting for the day when doors open again. If you made it this far, you're clearly someone who values staying ahead of the story. By subscribing, you'll always be the first to catch updates that others miss. Liking this video helps more people discover the truth behind the headlines. And your comment, whether it's your opinion, your question, or even just a thought, creates a community where your voice matters. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share your perspective in the comments. Together, we build something bigger than just news. We build understanding.